In this Genshin Impact guide, I'm gonna give you the only characters your account will ever need to be so powerful that you can beat any content the game will ever throw at you without wasting your primos on stuff that might look nice but is really just a trap. But not just that, we're also going to talk about how exactly all those characters work, their team options, and which weapons you want to best run with them. Of course, this list is for everyone, no matter if you're a spender or even completely free to play. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, before we get into the first character, and this is very important, so please don't skip, you need to understand what exactly this list is so you can draw the right conclusions for your personal account. See, if you simply want to play the game with the characters that you like, that's completely fair, you do you. This video is for those of you who primarily want to build a strong account. And in that sense, today's characters are those that make the best foundation to build a strong account on. The teams that you can make out of them alone are already some of the best in the game, but I picked them in a way that they're also future-proof, meaning that when new characters come out, they're almost guaranteed to work well with one or even multiple of today's characters. But with that being said, let's finally look at the first characters. And I want to start out with the first element that you ever encounter after starting the game, which would be a Nemo. See, no matter which account you're talking about, every player out there wants to have that one feature on their account, which is one good Nemo character to swirl elements around. In Genshin Impact, you're doing the most damage if you take advantage of multiple elements and trigger elemental reactions. That, I think, should come to nobody's surprise. And the reason you want to have an Anemo character that can do good swirling is, with an Anemo character, when they trigger a swirl reaction, they create an area of effect where elements that are applied to different enemies get applied to everybody in that area. You probably already experienced that yourself when you tried your Anemo Traveler out after starting the game. However, while this is already extremely strong, this is not even where it ends. See, there is a specific artifact set in the game called Viridescent Veneer, which you can even already get in the Mondstadt area. This artifact set is crazy OP because the 4-piece set effect makes it that whenever you swirl an element onto an enemy, that enemy will become 40% more vulnerable against that element that you applied. So, long story short, not only do Anemo characters help you trigger way more reactions and crowd-controlling enemies with their Anemo swirls, they're also gonna make those enemies weaker to the elements that they're applying. So yeah, I think I don't need to go further into why Anemo is so great, you probably understood that by now, but now let's go into which Anemo characters are the best to do exactly that. When it comes to those swirl supports, there are really just 3 options here, those being Venti, Sucrose, and Kazuha. Let's go over them one after the other. Venti is the Anemo Archon, and the main thing about his kit is his Elemental Burst, which creates basically an Anemo vortex, being like a black hole that sucks in all nearby enemies and swirls all the elements that are applied to them around at the same time. This is extremely powerful against groups of multiple smaller or medium-sized enemies because they can easily be pulled in by that vortex. In these types of scenarios, Venti is the best option out there. However, he falls a bit short when it comes to boss-type enemies because those are usually so big that the vortex cannot really suck them in, so he struggles to really apply all the strength that he has. Which is also why many players say that the real Anemo Archon is actually Kazuha. For him, the grouping is mainly done by his elemental skill, which nicely sucks in all the enemies in one place, whereas most of his swirling is done by his elemental burst, which creates a tornado with a certain radius, and every enemy in there will constantly have all their elements applied to them through the swirl reaction. This is very good because that means he can not only suck in multiple smaller enemies with his elemental skill, he also, when he's in a boss fight, can use his elemental burst to create that tornado in place, and thereby also the boss enemy will constantly be swirled, which is something that Venti struggles with. By the way, if you happen to watch this video 3 to 6 weeks after its release, then Kazuha will be on that current banner, so you might just be able to snatch him right away. But before we draw a conclusion, let's also quickly talk about Sucrose. Now, to put it very simply, Sucrose is pretty much just a 4-star version of Kazuha. Of course, there are certain differences and certain teams where you rather have Kazuha or rather have Sucrose, but I don't want to get that much into the detail right now. What is important to you is you want to make sure that you have one of these 3 characters. In my personal opinion, Kazuha would be the objectively best choice for most accounts out there, but don't get me wrong, the other two are also very, very good. Just one thing you want to make sure, don't go for both Kazuha and Venti at the same time, because having both of them is rarely advantageous to any account out there. Let's also quickly talk about their weapon options. See, for every character that is mainly there to swirl, what you want to make sure is that they have as much elemental mastery as possible, and here's the good thing, there are also tons and tons of free-to-play friendly weapons for all three that give you almost as much elemental mastery as the 5-star ones. For example, for Sucrose, who's a Catalyst character, you could go with the Sacrificial Fragments, but you could also just craft the Mapamare, which will also give you elemental mastery, and what's even better, the 3-star option, Magic Guide, which I'm sure you already have multiple of, gives you also a decent chunk of elemental mastery, so it works nicely on Sucrose. For Kazuha, who's a sword user, you either craft the Iron Sting, which is a great EM weapon, or if you want to keep it at the 3-star options, you could also just use the Dark Iron Sword, which you can get out of Leeweg chests. And finally, for the bow user Venti, you could either go with the Stringless, but there's also a 3-star option called the Raven Bow. I'm sure you're also gonna have multiple of these by now already. So much for your account's optimal Anemo options. Up next, I want to talk about a very special character who is a support that is so good that pretty much every account who doesn't have him is at a real disadvantage. This character being the one and only Bennett. Bennett is a Pyro 4-star and he uses a sword, and to make it really short, he has his Elemental Burst, which creates a circle on the ground, and your current character, when they're in the circle, not only gets healed by a decent margin, but also gets the literally strongest attack buff in the entire game. Believe me, Bennett's attack buff is absolutely out of this world crazy, and you want that for many teams out there. You could get him both from banners if you're lucky and he's featured as a 4-star, but also from the Star Glitter shop every November and May, so you don't even need to pull on the banner. Just one thing to note here, his attack buff scales with his flat attack, which means the attack that he himself has plus the attack that his sword has. Anything coming from the artifact set that you equip on him will not count towards his attack buff, which in turn means you ideally want to pair him with a sword that has a high base attack to make sure that your attack buff is as strong as it can possibly be. However, it's also very safe to either go with a Sacrificial or Favonius sword, which gives you a decent chunk of energy recharge. And now that we're already talking about Pyro characters, there is a second Pyro character that you absolutely super duper duper want to have, and that would be Xiangling. The main part of her kit is her Elemental Burst, where she summons her Pyronado. This is like a Pyro Blade that is circling your active character, so it stays on the field even if you swap Xiangling out and use someone else, and it deals crazy damage, especially if it triggers either Vaporize or Melt reactions. See, what you need to understand is, in Genshin Impact, you're playing a whole team made of 4 characters, but only one of these 4 can be on the field at any given time, meaning characters like Xiangling, who are able to do damage even if they're not on the field, are extremely valuable to the point where they're even more important than your main on-field DPS. So having Xiangling in your party is a real boon to pretty much every Vaporize or Melt team. And what's even better is, even though she's in the Star Glitter shop, you don't even have to do anything in that regard, because you can get 1 copy of Xiangling for free from just running the first couple floors of the Spiral Abyss. And guess what? Her free-to-play friendliness doesn't even end there, because her best weapon, or at least one of her best weapons, is called the Catch, which is a spear that you can get from just going around the country and catching various different types of fish, and then exchange it with the fisher from Inazuma to get the spear out of it. Now, before we go on, I also quickly want to mention one great synergy, which would be Xiangling with the aforementioned Bennett, because here's the thing. When Bennett places down his field where he gets the attack buff, and you swap out to Xiangling and then trigger her Pyronado burst, that Pyronado snapshots the attack buff from Bennett. What that means is, you can even walk out of the circle that Bennett made, and the Pyronado will still have the effects of Bennett's buff on it until the Pyronado itself ends. This makes Bennett and Xiangling an absolutely OP combo in pretty much every Vaporize or Melt team. And just by the way, if you could maybe spare a like, I would be super grateful, because it helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now, let's go on and talk about probably the most versatile element in the entire game, which would be Hydro. Alright, so when it comes to Hydro, there is no way to avoid the Hydro Archon herself, the fabulous Lady Furina. Furina is both an off-field sub-DPS as well as a whole team buffer. With her kit, she summons 3 Hydro creatures that deal damage to nearby opponents, while also at the same time draining your entire team's HP and therefore giving them a massive and unprecedented amount of damage bonus, which is really absolutely crazy. Now, the obvious problem with her is of course that she drains your entire team's health, so you ideally want to make sure that you have a healer in the team at the same time who can counter that effect. In terms of weapons, she has a very free-to-play friendly option, because just like Xiangling with her catch, which is a fishing weapon, also for Furina, a great option would be the Fleuve Cendre Ferryman, which is a fontaine weapon that you can also get by just fishing. So much for the Hydro Archon, but when it comes to Hydro characters that I think everybody should have, this is only the start. As I previously said, off-field characters are usually more valuable than on-field characters, and in that sense, we have a very dynamic duo coming up, and that would be Xingqiu and Yelan. For both of them, the main thing about their kit is their Elemental Burst, which summons water droplets or water swords that will automatically attack nearby enemies that you're attacking with your current on-field character with Hydro Energy. As you also see in the background right now, these two are really very similar. The main difference here is that Yelan deals of course more damage and also buffs the attack of your current on-field character a bit, while Xingqiu is a more defensive option. He also summons those rain swords that surround your on-field character, which give them more knockdown resistance and eat up a portion of damage, so it makes your on-field character more survivable and even provides a little bit of heal. Now, in my opinion, since Xingqiu is a 4-star character and you can get him for free every year at the Lantern Rite event, I think he's a character that really everybody out there should have, and if you don't have him yet, then work on getting him as fast as possible. As for Yelan, if you already have a well-built Xingqiu, then she doesn't have that much of a high priority compared to other 5-star characters, so I would make sure to get other 5 stars from today's list maybe a bit first, but still she's an absolutely amazing powerhouse. She deals crazy numbers, and I think pretty much every account out there would benefit from having her, even if they already have Xingqiu. As for weapons, also both of them have great free-to-play options, with Xingqiu either going for the Sacrificial Sword or the Favonius Sword because, you know, he likes to have a lot of energy recharge, and Yelan can make great use of the Recurve Bow or the Slingshot, both being very free-to-play friendly options. We will also get back to Hydro a bit later in the video when we talk about other types of characters, so stay tuned for that, but for now, let's go on to one of the next 4 big elements, which would be Electro, and see which characters of that you want to make sure to get for your account. Alright, so when it comes to Electro, I want to start out with 2 of the best sub-DPS characters in the game, which would be Fischl and Beidou. About Fischl, it's pretty simple. Her elemental skill and burst are pretty much the same thing. You know, she summons her Raven Oz, who stays on the field even if Fischl swaps out, and then Oz attacks enemies alongside your on-field character, dealing really impressive damage with a good attack scaling. As for Beidou, her main thing is her Elemental Burst, which also attacks alongside with your current on-field character, dealing even more Electro damage, and this is the good part, and unfortunately I got that wrong in one of my previous videos, her burst also attacks in sync with characters that deal damage with their charged attack, not only with their normal attack, which can be very helpful in some teams. Now, both Fischl and Beidou are available through the Star Glitter shop, so you might not even have to pull on a banner to get them, and Beidou being a Liyue character, she can also be gotten from the Lantern Rite once every year. All in all, these 2 are an absolute Electro dream team, so you should try to get both of them as soon as you can. But when it comes to Electro characters, we are not done yet. Remember how initially I was talking about Bennett being such a great attack buffer and that everybody wants to have him? Well, the thing with him is that his attack buff comes through his Elemental Burst, and if you run out of the ring or the enemies walk away, then you cannot really use the buff anymore, and it's just, Bennett's buff is really strong, but in many situations super inconvenient. Introducing another Electro character that I think is super underrated and actually really strong, and that would be Kucha Sara. See, just like Bennett, also Sara provides a really nice attack buff. Unfortunately, she doesn't do any healing, and also her buff is a little bit weaker than the one that Bennett provides. However, her buff is not her elemental burst, it just comes from her skill, which makes it really convenient. You can pull it off all the time, the character will be buffed until the timer runs out, and also, just in case you ever get her to her 6th constellation, then she works super great with other Electro characters because she also further increases crit damage for Electro characters with her 6th constellation. I think Kuchosara is super underrated and can be a good substitute even in non-Electro teams, just that she is a little bit more constellation dependent than Bennett. But who knows, maybe in the future there will be a banner which has her on the banner and you actually want to have the 5-star, so yeah, that would be a great option to get some constellations for her at the same time, because she is a great Electro buffer. And finally, we have Kuki Shinobu, which is an Electro healer and also deals AoE Electro damage with her elemental skill. Kuki is really cool, because not only does she do a bit of healing, which is nice and all, but mainly she is used for Dendro teams, triggering Dendro cores into Hyper Bloom reactions with her AoE Electro. I don't want to get too much into the details right now because we will still talk about Bloom reactions, just note that Kuki is a really good Electro character, not one that you specifically need to pull for once she appears on a banner, but if she happens to be in a banner that you want to pull for anyway, she is always a good character to have. And you know what, now that I already teased the Dendro teams, let's just talk about Dendro right now. See, Dendro is a really special element in the game, because Dendro-related reactions are some of the strongest in the entire game, all while at the same time, most enemies that you're gonna encounter are usually not resistant to any type of Bloom reactions. So especially if you're struggling with strong enemies and you feel like you're just not putting out the numbers that you would like to, Bloom reactions might be something you want to look into. And when it comes to Bloom, and therefore Dendro, the very best character, not only for Dendro, but one of the best characters in the entire game, and I think pretty much a must-pull if you want to call her that, would be Nahida, the Dendro Archon herself. See, Nahida is extremely convenient. With her elemental skill, you can aim at nearby enemies, and then those enemies get Dendro applied to them, all while at the same time being connected with a little, let's call it Dendro wire. This effect lasts extremely long, so you don't need to worry about recasting that anytime soon, and it also spreads reaction damage between all the enemies that are connected by those wires, meaning you also have a great AoE spread of damage, especially when you run Bloom-related teams. When you build Nahida, you want to make sure that you give her as much elemental mastery as possible, which is cool because she is a Catalyst character, and for Catalyst characters there are so many great free-to-play options with elemental mastery on it, even the 3-star magic guide that I talked about earlier. And, you know, when we're talking about Dendro characters, I think the only quote-unquote must-pull would really be Nahida, and the rest is sort of up to personal preference. However, if you have Farina and you want to use Farina in a Dendro team, then I would like to add Baiju officially to that list of characters that you want to have. See, Baiju is a Dendro healer, and the good thing about him is he can not only heal the on-field character, but the entire team. So Baiju is the perfect counter for Farina in a Bloom-related team. If not, then you can safely skip Baiju, but if yes, then make sure to put him on the shopping list as well. Alright. So far, we've talked about a lot of different elements, but you might have noticed that I left out two specific ones, those being Cryo and Geo. Why haven't I mentioned them so far? See, as I initially said in the intro of this video, what this is all about today is to give you the best character suggestions to build a solid foundation for a strong account. And while it is certainly fun to use Cryo and Geo characters, and there are certainly strong Cryo and Geo teams out there, right? I don't want to deny that. When it comes to purely speaking meta, when it comes to purely giving you the basic foundation of a very strong account, then unfortunately there aren't any Cryo or Geo characters out there that I would consider a must-pull. Of course, going forward, if there is a Geo character or there is a Cryo character that you want to try out and maybe build a Melch team with them, you can totally do that, but I wouldn't go so far to include them in the foundation of what's absolutely necessary themselves. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. But I think I've made that point clear enough now. Let's go on to the next part of today's video, which would be main DPS characters. See, up until now, all the characters that we talked about, no matter if 4-star or 5 stars, were pretty much all off-field characters. However, when you want to build a strong account, it wouldn't be fair to completely leave out the main on-field DPS characters, the main hyper carries of your team, so that's why I want to talk about them right now. What is important to know about on-field characters is that in Genshin Impact, there are a ton of really flashy looking, really cool on-field DPS characters, and the game really pushes those characters in your face. They want to market their main DPS characters, they want you to love them, and they want you to pull for them. But to basically beat all content in the game, what you really need are two different, very strong teams, and that's it. Meaning, in an ideal situation, you would also only just have 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 on-field DPS characters, and that's it, at least when you're free to play and you have to watch your primos a little bit more closely. And when it comes to those 2 to 3 on-field damage dealers for your account, then here are some suggestions. If you want a Hydro on-field damage dealer, then Neuvillette is probably the strongest character right now in the entire game. With his elemental skill and burst, he creates those, they're called source water droplets on the field, which make that his charge attack, which is the main part of his kit, charges up way faster, and he can deal those big Kamehameha water rays, which deal absolutely ludicrous amounts of damage. When it comes to the aforementioned characters, you could for example go and play him in a Vaporized team with Xiangling, you could go for an Electrocharge team with Fischl and or Beidou, you could use him in a Bloom team with Nahida and or Baizhu, or you could just pair him with Furina at the same time to even buff his damage numbers crazier than you could ever think of. Another really strong option when it comes to on-field damage dealers would be Alhaitham, who is of the Dendra element and works really well with Nahida. Just note that if you don't have Nahida just yet, I wouldn't pull for Alhaitham just yet as well, because he really needs Nahida. Like, his damage potential doubles in comparison to without Nahida, so he really needs her. Make sure to first have her and then pull for Alhaitham. When it comes to building Vaporize or Melt teams, then Hu Tao is also one of the greatest characters out there, has always been and still is, because she deals crazy tons of damage as a Pyro on-fielder, works also really well together with Furina, Xingqiu, and Yelan. And finally, when it comes to main on-field DPS characters, then the Electro Archon herself, Raiden, should not be left out on a list because first, of course, she deals tons of damage as an on-field character, yes, but she also has crazy flexibility because she can be used as an off-fielder at the same time in so many different team options. It's really crazy, so if you like her, then she would be a great option for the main DPS slot as well. And before we wrap things up for today, here are some more characters as honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list, but I think they should be mentioned because they can be really great in some situations. So here we go. First of all, who I want to mention would be Navia. She is Geo and therefore not really a quote-unquote meta element, but she deals crazy damage as an on-field character and she works well in many also reaction-based teams that are not really centered around Geo. So she's just a general, I would call her more like an universal DPS character that can fit in many different teams, even though she herself isn't the one dealing damage through elemental reactions. Then on rank number 2, we would have Yao Yao, who is an off-field healer and Dendro plier / sub DPS. If you're building a Dendro team, no matter which one, and you still have one open slot, then Yao Yao would always be a safe option. Then we have, of course, the big Geo Daddy, the CEO of Geo, Zhongli himself, who is a super duper convenient pick. See, Zhongli is the strongest shielder in the entire game, and while he doesn't really provide that much team damage and that much team power, simply playing with him and having his strong shield around your current character is super duper convenient. You don't need to really worry about evading enemy attacks, or you could just stand there and have his shield eat up all the incoming damage while you chill out big time. And finally, another character that I should absolutely mention would be Xian Yun, because she is a very strong team-wide healer and enables nice playstyles, just that I think she's not really that much of a must-pull when you're really going for meta. By the way, in case you're still relatively new to Genshin Impact, then absolutely don't miss out this guide right here to avoid the most painful new player traps. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, travel smart.